Welcome to episode 20 of the It's in the Ballot Roadshow for 2023. Today we're in the Hamilton East Electorate, and if you're tired of having too much Chris and Chris content, here is some Alex and Alex. I'm Alexander Garside, and this is Alex Corkin, the sole candidate who was brave enough to show up and represent your community on It's in the Ballot. All right. This is usually the point in the show where I'd introduce the candidates. Ask the candidates to give themselves an introduction. But I will just ask the singular candidate to introduce himself. So, take it away, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Good afternoon. It's awesome to be here. My name is Alex Corkin, and I'm standing for the Opportunities Party in Hamilton East. The reason that I decided to stand for the Opportunities Party in Hamilton East was because fundamentally, I think that we're not having the right conversations in Parliament. Parliament needs to innovate. The world has changed a lot in 20 years, but I don't see the way that politics has changed, matching the same innovation that we're seeing across New Zealand. I believe that I can represent you in Hamilton East better than other party candidates can, because I come from a smaller party, I come from a more flexible party, and I come from a party that believes deeply in solving the root problems that face our country, rather than tinkering at the edges with band-aid solutions that ultimately don't fix anything. Thank you.
And typically we would have a video, or indeed the host, introducing the electorate, but I've asked Alex to help out with just sort of showing us around Hamilton East.
Awesome. So let's zoom in on the bottom of the electorate. That's the place to start, I reckon, because we've got arguably the best feature of Hamilton, the mighty Hamilton Gardens, featuring such excellent gardens as the Italian Renaissance Garden and the Egyptian Garden, two of my favorites. Scrolling up a little bit, you have got Hillcrest, you've got the War Memorial Park, and you've got a whole bunch of really interesting university and education places. This is Scarfy Land equivalent for Hamilton East. It's a great place to be. Moving up a little bit, out to the eastern part there, you've obviously got the big university campus. Really interesting, you've got the inland port, which is currently being developed. That's going to be a massive logistical hub over the next 10, 20 years, so that's really exciting. Scrolling up a little bit more, where are we? Oh, Claudelands. Claudelands is a great place to be. The Claudelands Park and Convention Centre is outstanding. I went to a Lego convention with my two sons a few weeks ago. That was pretty cool. We're moving up into Chartwell now, where you've got establishments such as the Wayward Pigeon, great pub, highly recommended. And then moving up into the newer parts of Hamilton around Rototuna, Flagstaff. There's new Rototuna, new Flagstaff, and old Rototuna, old Flagstaff. So that's a really new development in Hamilton, which is a great part of Hamilton East as well. My kids go to school there. It's awesome. And then you're getting right to the outskirts. You're getting places like the motorway coming in there. You're getting the brand new Countdown. It's obviously extremely exciting stuff when you get a new supermarket. So that's my breakdown of the electorate.
And thank you. So here are some questions that we think that you'll be asking after the show. Why do those opposed to co-governance always keep talking about two tables in the room with Māori and non-Māori having their backs to each other? Is New Zealand ready to become a nation of issue punishment now, ask questions later, and then issue apologies and compensation for wrongly issuing out punishment that wasn't warranted or justified? And why do some think that in order for Te Huia to be successful, it needs to be operating at 120% capacity before it can even depart Frankton Junction? Inviting back for tonight's show is our question host from Tauranga, Jill, who's going to be asking us the questions from our 28 boxes.
Fantastic. So,
Yes.
Ready for questions now?
Yep. So, so we're going to be asking 28 questions. There will be no button or defer cards because, well, there's really no one to button or defer to. No one else decided that you were worth the time. So thanks, Alex, for really, showing up. Some of these questions are thought-provoking. Some of these questions are slightly loaded. All of them are viewer submitted. So I think take it away, Jill.
Thank you, Alex. So, Alex, would you like to pick your first box number, please?
Sure, we might as well start with number 1.
Why not? We have question I for India. So the question is government spending on cycling and cycleways a waste of money?
I would say absolutely not. Cycleways are a critical part of any urban infrastructure. We know that 72,000 car trips a day in Hamilton are under 2 kilometres in length. We know that if we provide safe cycling infrastructure, that people will use it. We know that if we want to keep our commitments to fighting climate change, to reducing our carbon emissions, that we need to take cars off the road. We cannot build our way with roads to a climate future where the planet is not cooking us alive. Every trip that we can get off the road makes the experience better for road users, better for cycleway users, and better for the country as a whole. We are more active, we enjoy ourselves more, we stress out less about the cost of petrol, and the investment required to have good cycleways is vastly cheaper than the equivalent investment in roading.
And a little follow-up to that. Yes, in Wellington, depending on the news media you subscribe to, cycleways, will solve all the problems or completely destroy the community. Are there any particular sort of cycle projects, sort of past, present, or future in Hamilton that sort of present fantastic opportunities, or indeed will tear the city asunder?
I think it's an interesting question. It really depends on what you're looking to get out of that cycleway. If you're just looking to take a car off the road, any cycleway is a good cycleway or a bad cycleway, depending on your particular opinion. The thing that really excites me about cycleways right now is that we're at the stage in Hamilton where I can cycle from the top of Rotorua, where I used to live, all the way down to the Hamilton Gardens in probably 15 or 20 minutes. And most of the time that I'm on the bike there, I'm on a cycleway. I can come down Wairere Drive on a cycleway. I can head out to Ruakura on a cycleway. We're already so close to being pretty much there in terms of cycleways in Hamilton, depending on whether you're on this side of the bridge or the other side of the bridge in Hamilton West. So I think the investment that we would need to get something really world-class and outstanding, it's very, very minimal. And as I said, it takes cars off the road. So if you absolutely have to use a car for that trip, cycleways are good for you. Don't fight it.
Cool beans.
Box. Your next box number.
Yeah, so we're just going to cycle through all these, huh? Let's go with 25.
Okay. Wrong one. We have question V. So it's V for Victor. The question is, just make sure that our remote editor knows which question we're actually on. Thank you. Can someone do that for me?
I can do that. Yep.
Oh, that's quite cool. Maybe you do that this time.
Sure thing.
Cool. In your opinion, what are the 3 most important issues that New Zealand is facing?
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think that there are sort of two categories of important questions or important issues that New Zealand is facing. I think that individually, there can be no question that we're facing a massive cost of living crisis, right? It has never been more expensive to live in New Zealand than what it is today. And the single biggest component of that is the cost of housing. Whether you're renting, whether you're paying a mortgage, whether you're saving for a deposit, it's incredibly hard to deal with the cost of housing right now. I think more broadly, though, if you can look past individual issues like the cost of living, the bigger national issue that we have is that we have these two main political parties that can't even be bothered to turn up to debates like these. They can't be bothered to look into the root cause of issues and actually solve for the problems. And so we get this tinkering around the edges. We get this tinkering around the edges that doesn't solve any of our problems, that doesn't help anyone. All it does is put Band-Aids on a big gaping open wound rather than actually fixing those problems for all New Zealanders and moving on with our lives.
And your next number?
17, please. I'm just picking from the front because it's easier. We're going to go through all of them anyway. So,
Fine, we have question AB, Alpha Bravo. So, do you think that transgender females should be able to compete in women's sports?
I think this is I find this question very challenging, and I'm probably going to take more than a minute to answer it, so I'll ask for your forgiveness when the bleeper goes. I think this is a really cheeky question that seeks to make the answerer look bad if they say anything other than yes. This question is deliberately worded in a way to screw the scrum, so that the only logical thing that you can say is yes. This question isn't about transgender women in sports. This question is about who gets to define who a woman is and what qualities a woman has. We already have athletes overseas that have testosterone levels higher that are female than some male athletes. We already have instances where people are trying to say that women who were born women cannot participate in women's sports because their levels of testosterone are too high. So this isn't a question about transgender women in sports. This is a question about who gets to define what it is to be a woman. And this is an attempt by those people to take away the right of you and me and everybody to define who we are, how we identify, and what activities, hobbies we can take on.
Your next number?
Hopefully number 13 is a little bit less fiery.
We have question G for golf. Do you think New Zealand has coped well with the COVID-19 pandemic, and what lessons have we learned?
I think it's a mixed bag. I think if you look at the numbers, if you look at the deaths that we've had, the all-causes mortality over that period, there can be no question that we have come through this pandemic a whole lot better than countries like Italy, countries like the United States, a whole bunch of other countries across the world. We've had some social cohesion issues there. We've had some issues around the economy. We've had some issues around the way that we've gotten through that. But by and large, I think New Zealand can be really proud of the way that we've all come together. The lesson learned for me is that when the stakes are high, New Zealanders can pull together and we can collectively make decisions that are in the interests of the greater good and in the interests of those who are more vulnerable than us. That is what it means to be part of a community for me. I think that any decision that you make in a situation like that, where you're a governor and you are making life and death decisions with incomplete information that changes rapidly, I think that the government did a fantastic job and that should be celebrated.
Another number.
14, please.
We have question E for echo. The Future of Local Government report says a significant fund is also needed to support climate change adaptation activities. How is your party going to respond to this issue?
Yeah, so the Opportunities Party really values progressive climate action that uses market systems, that uses other systems to affect change. So one of the leading policies that we have in this area is our climate policy, where we want to introduce this concept of a biodiversity credit. I'll talk very briefly about the difference between a credit and an offset. An offset is a way of paying for something bad that you have done. A credit is a way of incentivizing good behavior. So we believe that the creation of a marketplace where investors who want to invest in green activities like reforestry in marginal areas, like wetland rewetting, all these kinds of biodiversity positive actions, can invest in that. And they can, for example, enable our farmers to be biodiversity champions by accessing that money to do regenerative, biodiverse activities and make those investments on their farm. So that's the key funding, and it's market funding, it's market-led, and it's proven to have good long-term outcomes.
And thinking about climate change adaptation, a lot of coastal places are having to consider managed retreat, and even inland in Rotorua. We were staying at Lake Rotorua, and the lake levels are high enough that I suspect that any higher, and there would be sort of concern for the local houses there. Are the river levels and extreme weather events related to it? Is that a big issue here?
Yeah, it's kind of, for me, it's a national sport driving down River Road on a rainy day and watching just how high up the river is coming. Auckland is doing us a favor here by taking lots of our water out of the Waikato River and keeping the levels down for us, but that's going to have, there's only a certain amount of water you can take. But look, the river level day to day does vary quite a lot when it's hot and when it's rainy. And I think that more than the thing that I worry about is where you have these extreme weather events that dump a whole bunch of water into that river, you get more erosion. You get more eating away of the land at the base of the river. And we have lots of very expensive houses that get to overlook that river on both sides. At what point are insurance companies, because this is a market thing, like government's not deciding that, at what point are insurance companies going to say, there's too much erosion there, we're actually not going to insure your house anymore?
Yeah.
Another number, Alex?
Number 9, please.
We have P for Papa. Should we review the ban on single-use plastic bags?
Yeah, short answer, no. I get just as agitated as anybody when I turn up to the supermarket in Chartwell and realize that I've left my bags at home and I have to buy a couple more bags. That's super annoying. But I think that's a small price to pay for not putting any more forever plastics into the ground or into the ocean or into our bodies, through microplastics and all that kind of thing. So I think it's a really small and easy price to pay.
And the next number.
22, please.
We have question Q for Quebec. Does your party believe that we should protect spaces and services exclusively for biological women?
Yeah, so this question is a lot like the previous question that I answered, in that it's deliberately worded in a way to make me sound like an asshole if I say anything other than yes. Again, this question comes down to the efforts of some people to control who you are and how you identify. There's absolutely no evidence that shows there's this plague of these big burly men pretending to be women trying to get into bathrooms. That's not happening. What we know is that some people are born into bodies that don't match what their brains think. This is a difference between brain chemistry and a difference between the things that you were born with. We believe that your mind is what makes you who you are, and every effort should be taken to have your body match your mind. There are reasons why you should or should not go down that path. There are things that you should do before you make any permanent decisions like that. But it absolutely should not be a decision, worrying that somebody's going to let me into the space or somebody's going to let me out of my space. This is about identity and nothing more.
Good answer. Next number.
7, please.
We have question A for Alpha. Over the past few years, New Zealand has suffered from many forms of division. How would your party reconnect people and heal the divide so we are a united country once again?
Yeah, this is a great question, and the Opportunities Party has a lot to say on this. Fundamentally, we believe in critical thinking, we believe in fairness, we believe that everybody should be able to be part of a community and they should be able to thrive in that community. So social cohesion is a really big deal for us. We have policy around that. Our policy includes things like reducing the MMP threshold down to 3.5%. This means that more parties with a smaller share of the vote can get into Parliament. And what that means is that your vote gets represented, even if you happen to not be voting for one of the two big parties. We have policy around increasing term limits so that politicians are more focused on governing rather than gearing up for the next election, which inevitably results in better representation for you. We believe in things like trying out new ways of governance, trying out alternative ways of governance that haven't been tried before. It kind of harks back to that innovation question that I asked before. Parliament needs to innovate, and we need to innovate around the rules of Parliament so that everybody has a voice.
And a supplementary question, do you believe that we should increase the number of MPs, given that, was it 25% of sitting MPs are currently in the executive?
Yeah, I think it's a really tricky question when do you increase MPs and when do you not increase MPs? I think that if you look at the amount of backbenchers that we have, again, my lens on this is representation. If we can say increasing the amount of MPs is going to get us better representation, then great, let's do it. If we think that increasing the amount of MPs will increase the amount of good that they're able to do in their communities, then great, let's do it. But I think we have this core of backbench MPs who perhaps not necessarily just there to make up the party votes, but how do we deploy those backbench MPs who aren't part of the executive to be more visible in their communities and to be doing more work? And often they're working very hard. It's just a case of because they're not in the executive, you can't see it. So how can we increase the transparency of Parliament, and how can we make sure that those MPs can be seen to be doing the great job that they're doing?
Yes, it's been an interesting process going around the country. We've been sort of meeting a lot of very switched on and hardworking people. Yeah. So would you like to pick another number?
Yeah, let's go with number 10.
We have R for Romeo. Would your party advocate for introducing a sugar drinks tax to help combat obesity, dental decay, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and other chronic medical conditions?
Yes, we would. We would introduce a sugar tax. I'm not sure what the values would be. The idea with a sugar tax is that you want to disincentivize the use of highly unhealthy foods and incentivize the use of foods that are healthy for you. We obviously still want people to have a choice. If you want to go and buy a Mars bar, you should be able to go and do that. But how do we do that in a way that broadly increases our population health? So things like introducing a sugar tax are a good start. We also need to find ways of making healthy food more accessible and cheaper. And before we talk about taking GST off fruit and vegetables, that has a negligible effect on the cost. Countdown and the other supermarkets are just going to pocket the difference, and actually it costs more to administer that scheme than the money that you would actually raise from it. So a bit of a fizzer on the GST off fruits and vegetables there. We've got to find better ways of doing that, better ways of creating better public health outcomes through policy. Number 11, please.
We have Z for Zulu. Do you think New Zealand should investigate having an independent commissioner against corruption, as in New South Wales?
Yes, we do. The Opportunities Party policy is that we will introduce an anti-corruption commissioner. Again, taking it back to the values for the Opportunity Party, we believe in fairness and we believe in having those courageous conversations. One of the things that has a big impact on social cohesion that we talked about just before is this perception that government is not working for the people, by the people. This idea that you have lobbyists coming in and influencing politicians in a way that they shouldn't, or that you have money coming into the system and influencing politicians in a way that they shouldn't. And so again, the Opportunities Party policy is to introduce an anti-corruption commissioner. We also want to change the rules and increase transparency around lobbyists. We want that to be an extremely obvious thing when lobbyists come in. We want to introduce caps on political spending and donations to take the money aspect away from it and ensure that parties are funded the same way, and ultimately create a more transparent government.
A little follow-up to that. We definitely don't want politicians sort of being swayed by their own personal interests. A substantial number of them are landlords. Do you feel that that in some way impacts their decision-making on housing policy?
I think that it's a natural thing for that to happen, and it's something that needs to actively be guarded against. I'm reminded of the story about two fish swimming through the ocean, talking to one another, and one fish says to the other fish, "Geez, what do you think about all this water?" And the other fish goes, "What the hell are you talking about?" Completely unaware of the environment that they're in. And I think a lot of politicians, a lot of people, everybody, right? It's natural to be in that situation. So from an Opportunities Party perspective, we want that transparency. We want to be able to introduce mechanisms so that we can actively guard against conflicts of interest, against things like that. We already have some mechanisms for it, but we think that there's always ways to be more transparent and more clear and to better guard against conflicts of interests, including owning 10 houses and being a person in the seat making decisions about housing. So short answer, yes.
All right, and next number.
21, please.
We have question B for Bravo. Do you believe that 16-year-olds have the maturity to vote?
The short answer is yes. The Opportunities Party has policy around lowering the age to vote to 16, pending the introduction of a civics topic into the curriculum in schools. What you find with young people is often that you get out what you put in. We believe that investing in young people through policies like the Teal Card, through policies like putting in a future generations commissioner into Parliament, these are things that actively get youth involved in politics, and we want youth involved in politics. There's a lot of conversation around, oh, they're too young, they don't know enough, they're not, up enough with politicians, and people, mum and dad can stand over them and cast their vote for them. All of those arguments that you can make about them, you can make about anybody regardless of their age. There's nothing to say that if we don't trust children with our future, trust young people with our future, there's nothing to say that they'll let us down any more than anybody else, whether they're 20 or 40 or 60 or 80 would.
All right. Next number.
15, please.
We have question W for Whiskey. How has New Zealand changed since you were a child? Has it changed for the better?
I think it's a mixed bag. I remember as a child, heading out into the street on my bike and going and cycling around the neighborhood for 6 to 8 hours on a Saturday afternoon, going down to the local BMX track. I don't think that I'd do that today. I think that the world isn't necessarily any more dangerous, but I think our communities are a lot weaker. And I think that's a really terrible thing. I mourn the loss of those strong communities. When I was young, I knew my neighbors. I knew the neighbor kids. We'd go over and play at each other's houses. It was great times. You don't get that anymore. You get people moving around a lot because the landlord's jacking the rent and they can't afford to stay in that spot. You get people struggling to buy houses, struggling to put down roots in the places where they grew up. It's natural that you're not going to feel that same level of community. So I think that's one way in which perhaps we've gone backwards. On the other hand, I think that we treat vulnerable people in our communities a whole lot better than we used to. I think that we're a whole lot more tolerant and understanding of people who don't look the same as us and talk the same as us. And I think that's a really wonderful thing that we need to do more of.
Cool beans.
23, please.
We have question Y for Yankee. What is your party's policy to get families out of emergency accommodation and into long-term stable housing?
You should vote for the Opportunities Party because it is the Opportunities Party policy to put $3 billion billion with a B, $3 billion into community housing organizations to build houses. We will clear the emergency housing waitlist by investing that amount of money into community housing associations. On top of that, we will introduce a land value tax, which encourages more productive use of urban residential land where people want to use. We encourage the medium density residential standards policy around densification in transit nodes in urban areas. And we support the, I forget what it's called, the National Policy Statement on Urban Development, I think it is. All of these things to say, we want councils to be planning for diversity. We want councils for density. We want councils to be demonstrating that they've zoned enough land for density. And so by pumping all of that money into the community housing associations, we can clear the wait list and get everybody out of emergency housing into fit for purpose homes.
Nice. Next number.
Next one, 16, please.
We have question H for hotel. Property investors often outbid first home buyers at house auctions. How would you encourage these investors to switch to more productive investments?
Yeah, so the first thing that the Opportunities Party believes in is that our policy is to, as I said, introduce that land value tax before and introduce a brake on residential rental prices in the process of introducing that land tax so that that cost doesn't get passed on to renters. That encourages landlords to stop land banking. We have 3,000 empty homes in Hamilton right now that somebody could be living in. So we want to introduce that land value tax and encourage landlords to use it or sell it. And at the same time, we have policy to ensure that when a residential property is being purchased for investment purposes, that the purchaser of that property has to provide 100% of the purchase price of that property in cash upfront. So you can't get the situation where landlords with 10 properties can leverage themselves into property after property after property in a way that first home buyers can't.
And what's the supplementary one? What is the sort of the quality of the housing around Hamilton? Because in wet and windy Wellington, we were in the house buying process sort of last year, this year, and there were some absolute shocking places around.
I think in Hamilton, obviously with anywhere else that you would go in New Zealand, it's going to vary. You're going to get some rental houses that are very, very good and some that are really poor. One of the things that we believe in, I think there's a question about the winter energy payment coming up later tonight. We don't have policy on that. But what we do believe is that if we had the choice of, for example, giving a winter energy payment or actually solving the core issue around why is that house cold, we would rather solve the issue of why the house is cold rather than putting that Band-Aid on top.
Nice. Next number.
24, please.
We have question N for November. What is your opinion or your party's commitment to conservation for the next term?
The Opportunities Party is extremely committed to solving climate change, and ideally we want to do that in a way, or solving climate change, having New Zealand meet our climate emissions and be responsible citizens, because we're not going to solve it by ourselves. We are really motivated to further this idea of these biodiversity credits that I talked a little bit about before. We believe that we can connect investors who want to invest in green initiatives around biodiversity with farmers, with rural landowners, with anybody who has marginal land that they want to regenerate for biodiversity. The important thing there is, if it was just about climate change, I was talking to a farmer out in Pukarua, if it was just about climate change, then this farmer would just plant 100 acres of pine trees. And that would be great for climate change. It would be horrible for biodiversity because none of our natural species live pine trees because they're introduced species, right? So you're better off introducing these biodiversity credits and solving for biodiversity, because everything that you have to do for biodiversity, you have to do for climate change. Number 18, please.
We have question AA, Alpha. John F. Kennedy quote, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Do you agree with that quote, and why?
Yeah, that quote really resonates with me. I have essentially based my entire working life around service to others. When I left school, I joined the army. I spent 9 months in Afghanistan doing that. When I came back from the army, I went to university to learn geography and software because I wanted to use those two things to help people. When I was studying, I worked part-time at Greenpeace. So I was one of the friendly people that would call you up during dinner time in Shortland Street and ask about, have you heard about the polar bears? So all of that stuff I did because I truly believe that I can make a difference and that I want to make a difference. I believe that service is a wonderful thing that everybody should have the opportunity of doing at some point in their lives. So yes, it really resonates.
Let's keep going.
All right, 26, please.
We have question U for unicorn form. What is your view on the role of rail projects, including initiatives like Te Huia, in improving public transport and connectivity in New Zealand?
The Opportunities Party is an awesome party for this. We have policy around alternative transports. For example, we want to electrify the bus fleet. We want to get the Southerner in Dunedin going again. We support Te Huia. We want that to be happening. And again, it all comes down to taking cars off the roads, and it comes down to taking trucks off the roads. We can transport goods over long distances using trains, but we have to invest. We have to take the money that we would normally spend building roads and put that into the rail network instead. As a personal example, I work in software right now. I work remotely, but one day a week I catch Te Huia up to Auckland. It's an incredible experience. Instead of sitting in traffic and stressing about how I'm going to be late, I'm having a morning coffee or having a beer after work, getting an extra 2 hours, 45, whatever it is in my day to read a book and chill out. Trains are awesome. We need more trains, and we need to invest in that to make it a reality.
Yes, and anything to save people from sort of traffic on the Southern Motorway is a good thing. From a Hamilton perspective, apart from the Hamilton to Auckland connection, what sort of public transport route or connection, what journey would you want to be able to do by public transport around here that you currently can't?
Are you talking about just within Hamilton, or
it could be within Hamilton? It could be sort of between here and one of the neighbouring cities.
Yeah, so I read a really interesting article a few years ago. I think it was from the Greater Auckland group, and they essentially had this idea of the Golden Triangle regional rail between Auckland, Hamilton, and Tauranga. I think that would be an awesome trip. I would love to take the train to Tauranga instead of having to drive over the Kaimais. My family have loved in the past taking the Overlander or the Northern Explorer when we used to live in Auckland all the way down to Wellington. Those trips are awesome trips, and they're massive tourist attractions. We can take cars off the road. We can meet our climate emissions targets. We can do lots of stuff with it. So we've just got to get on and invest.
Nice. So which one next?
Number 2, please.
We have question J for Juliet. The future of the local government report says the current local government funding and finance system is already under pressure and is not sustainable. How is your party going to respond to this issue?
Yeah, if you love effective local government that has the money to do the things that they want to do, you should vote for the Opportunities Party. We have policy around this. We have policy around decentralizing many of the functions that central government would normally take. We believe that local governments tend to know their communities. They tend to know what their communities want, and they tend to be able to prioritize and make the right calls and be accountable to those communities. Our policy is around taking all of the GST from new developments, new houses that are built, and returning that GST to governments for the purpose of infrastructure. So whether that be building pipes and putting them in the ground, or building libraries or pools or anything else around the local infrastructure that communities want and need.
That's good. We've been hearing quite a lot with this election around sort of using GST or not using GST as a tool to help local governments. So I'm glad to see that there's the sort of long overdue funding sort of heading that direction. All right, let's pick the next one.
Number 3, please.
We have question L for Lima. What role should New Zealand play in international refugees crises?
New Zealand should ultimately be a good neighbour to all of our Pacific neighbours who are undeniably being impacted by climate change. We already have a fantastic resettlement centre in Hamilton, where we have a lot of refugees that have come in and become productive parts of Hamilton, and that's really amazing. We need to do more of that. We need to fund that better, but we also need to use it to New Zealand's advantage. We have people who, over the next 20 years, there's going to be many that want to come and live in New Zealand. Some of those, it's going to be their choice. Some of those, it's not going to be their choice. But either way, we need to make sure that we're getting our immigration and refugee settings right and investing in the infrastructure to integrate these people into New Zealand, into the places where they want to live and into our economy, because we know that attracting highly skilled migrants, attracting refugees, attracting all of these groups is a net positive for New Zealand. It helps New Zealand be better, and we should invest in it. Number 4, please.
We have question K for Kilo. The Prime Minister said that no one was forced to get the COVID vaccine. Do you agree with that?
This is a really tough one to answer in 1 minute. I guess you have to define what does it mean to be compelled here. I don't think that anybody was held down and tied to a surgical bed and forced to get a COVID jab in their arm, but it's also true that people had to make decisions about whether or not they would keep their job and their livelihood or whether they would get vaccinated. Ultimately, again, I think that New Zealand and Jacinda Ardern in particular did a fantastic job helping us get through COVID. We saw that by far and away, the best and most effective economic and business response to a pandemic is a strong social health and public health response. So whether you want to say they held me down, they compulsed me, they forced me, or whether you don't want to say that, ultimately people have to make choices and people have to be willing to live with their choices. And I think, again, when you have politicians making life or death decisions with bad information that's changing rapidly, our government did a fantastic job in how they managed that. And there were costs with that as well. There were trade-offs to be made, and they made that.
And so there's, I think, last I heard, Helen Clark was working in the UN on a kind of international policy, because this was an international event, international best practice, and how we might, as an international community, approach it. Would you support NZ joining a treaty, sort of compelling it to do certain things, to follow international guidelines?
Yeah, it's quite a broad question. I guess it would depend what's in the treaty. It would depend what the treaty says. I wouldn't necessarily want New Zealand to be compelled to do the things that other countries have done, because actually we did a really good job and other countries by and large didn't. You look at the United States, 1.1 million people, when I checked the other week on the World Health Dictionary, World Health Database, 1.1 million people dead. In Italy, 200,000 people dead from COVID. I don't necessarily want to be compelled to deal with pandemics in the same way that those countries would. I would much rather that we lead in that area and we say, hey, look, this is actually how you deal with it. This is an area where we can lead rather than follow.
Good answer. All right. Next question.
Number 27, please.
We're solving the world's problems here.
We have question T for Tango. Does your party believe that there should be a policy on the location of alternative energy sources such as solar farms near urban areas?
Yeah, so I have to start answering this one by talking a little bit about how the land value tax works. So the Opportunities Party's policy around the land value tax is you essentially pay 0.75% of the value of your unimproved land. So not the value of your house, not the value of your spa pool that you put in the ground or whatever else it happens to be, just the unimproved land. What that does is that encourages the most efficient and effective use of the land that land can be used for. And in urban areas, in urban residential areas, that's housing. That's dense housing, right? So what you would find, and this is about setting the right incentives and setting the right guidelines around where you place power generators, the amount of land that a solar farm or a wind farm or a hydro dam would take up, it would be such a large amount of land to get an effective amount of power in it that it wouldn't really be feasible to do that in an urban area. And so that's an example of getting the incentives right so that the market does what you want it to do.
So this unimproved land value tax, does Hamilton have SNAs, significant natural area sort of designations?
None that I'm aware of. It's not to say there are none, just that I'm not aware of them.
But would, say, for example, an SNA zoned land represent, would that be excluded from the unimproved land?
Oh, are you talking about, like, for example, in Auckland where you've got historic houses and things like that?
I'm talking more in Wellington. We have
Yeah.
some areas of people's properties that have been kind of designated significant natural areas, which with the proposed rules, that would mean that people wouldn't be able to build on them, which effectively sort of lowers the usable area of their property that they have.
Yeah, okay. So taking it back to principles, we want to apply this land value tax in areas where people want to live. So if you've got a significant natural area, I guess I would wonder what's significant about it. Is it about biodiversity? Is it about history? Is it, why is that thing significant? And you probably have to make that on a case-by-case basis. If SNAs are designated as land that is not urban residential, then they naturally wouldn't come as part of the land value tax, because the only land that we care about for the purposes of the LVT are areas that are already designated as urban residential land. So in the case of an SNA that was, a wildlife park or something, that's not residential, that's a wildlife park, so the tax wouldn't apply.
And to other candidates who might be watching this, or other parties who might be watching this and thinking, how come he's getting such a good chance to expound on his policies? Well, you're free to come along. We have shows here tonight. We have shows here tomorrow. Well, we have shows tomorrow. And there shall be, with any luck, some shows coming up in Auckland. So tune in, get involved. You're more than welcome. Let's head to the next question.
28, please.
We have question S for Sierra. What is your party's position on Three Waters reform? Do you have an alternative model?
Yeah, this is another really hard question. So again, we don't have specific policies around Three Waters or the affordable water reforms. From a principles perspective and from a values perspective, again, I have to hark back to the idea that the Opportunities Party really loves this idea of smart, decentralized governance, really loves the idea of efficient investment, and in allowing communities to solve the problems in ways that make sense for them. So we haven't got specific policies around Three Waters. What we would expect is that local councils are going to be talking to their communities. They're going to be talking to communities about what they can afford, what services need to be provided, talking with experts, talking with stakeholders, all that kind of thing to form a plan. And I think then the question is, well, how do you fund it? That's, again, a very complicated question. But we would look to initiatives like returning GST, so the policy that the Opportunities Party has around returning GST to councils for infrastructure for that purpose.
All right, let's keep going.
Cool. Number 19, please.
Actually, let's before we jump into that one, Do you support the abolishment of DHBs?
Do you mean just in referring to general healthcare shake-up or something specifically around Te Whatu Ora? What's the context there?
District health boards with elected members rather than a more centralized coordination of these services.
Yeah, I think the first thing to acknowledge there is that everything is a trade-off. One of the reasons that places like New Zealand with low population bases, low tax bases, like to centralize things is because centralizing services gives you economies of scale. And that can bring down the prices of health treatments. One of the natural consequences of centralizing to achieve an economy of scale is that you necessarily position those services further away from the communities that really need them. So the Opportunities Party wants to see funding and investment go towards communities. There are some places where that really makes sense. For example, local councils deciding to put a library here and a swimming pool there. And there are some times where perhaps it doesn't make sense. I'm not sure about DHBs myself. I'd have to say that anything that we can do to target more investment towards administering health, and that's not just surgeons, that's also the people that book the appointments, that's also the people that do the administrative side of that. We have to find ways of funding these services in ways that are new and innovative and that solve for the problems that we've already got with DHBs and with centralization.
I'll let you continue, Jill.
Great. We've got a question O for Oscar. Given the option, would you double or halve our population growth?
It's a perfect segue from that last conversation. I would double our population. And the reason is to help us achieve those economy of scale. If you look at the costs of introducing light rail into Auckland, if you look at the cost of the Central Rail link that they're doing, new stations up in K Road, all that kind of thing, that cost of putting that infrastructure in is massive. It's very, very difficult to do that when you've only got 2 or 3 million people living in that city. If you look at Melbourne or Sydney, I don't think I've ever heard anybody complain about the trams or the trains or the public transport in Melbourne or Sydney. Granted, I don't live there. But when I visited, those trams and trains are awesome. They've got 5 million people living in that city. They've got 5 million, just over, I think it's 5.1 million living in Sydney, and I think 5.03 or something in Melbourne. We need that kind of population density to make providing high quality services that much more easy by having the ratepayers to pay for it.
Just 5 to go now.
Number 12, please.
We have question F for Foxtrot. Current information from overseas indicates that vaping is not a healthier alternative to smoking. Children of primary school age are becoming addicted. What is your party's plan to address this health concern?
If you want vaping to be dealt with, you should vote for the Opportunities Party. The reason that you should do that is that the Opportunities Party already has a petition out, which you should sign, by the way, regardless of whether or not you vote for us. You should sign that petition around making changes to the legislation for vaping. When vaping was originally introduced, it was designed to reduce the harm of smoking, and it was designed to be something that you would do to help you quit smoking. Our policy, the Opportunities Party policy, is to require the same treatment of vaping as we do for cigarettes. So that means plain packaging. That means keeping the actual vapes and the vape juice out of sight from the general public. And given that it started off as a way of a form of treatment for smoking, we would require that it be sold by pharmacies rather than vape shops or others like that. And we would also look at regulating the types of flavors that you're allowed to provide, because nobody on this planet can tell me that gummy lemon vape juice is not marketed at children. Number 20, please.
We have question D for Delta. Will your party review the relationships and sexuality education, known as RSE, in primary schools?
My position, the position of the Opportunities Party, is no, we would not review that. We believe that that RSE program is fit for purpose and is doing a good job. I think that it's a far cry from the sex education that probably everyone in this room got when we were in high school, which was more focused on the mechanical and biological aspects of children. RSE is about relationships. It's about boundaries, understanding boundaries, communicating boundaries, and it's about bodily autonomy. It's about teaching our children that their bodies are theirs and nobody else's. And it's about teaching those things in age-appropriate ways. Nobody's going in and giving inappropriate sex education to children who are too young to understand it. All that program is trying to do, and the teachers are doing a great job of it. We want to give them more training for that. All they're doing is teaching kids that their bodies are theirs. Just to add to this, and I'm going to go over time for half a second here, we know for a fact that most sexual abuse happens at the hands of family members. So it's not necessarily true that parents across the country are doing a great job of this. It's not necessarily true that you can safely learn that stuff from your parents. That's why it has to be taught in schools.
It's 3 to go.
Number 8, please.
We have question C, C for Charlie. How are you going to address the cost of living crisis?
I've talked about this in dribs and drabs earlier on in the night. The single biggest factor around cost of living is the cost of rent and the cost of mortgages. So our policy around tax and around affordable housing are the key call-outs there. We already want to introduce that land value tax. I've spoken about that before. We believe that that will have a massive impact on reducing the cost of housing and the cost of renting. We want to increase supply in the market. We want to do that, like I said, by clearing the public housing waiting list, investing $3 billion in community housing. We want to incentivize development and incentivize, good fit for purpose development through things like taking the burden off local governments providing infrastructure through that GST return that we talked about. And we also want to do things, forgive me, I'm having a bit of a mind blank here. We want to do things like bringing down the cost of materials. We want to bring down the costs of consenting and look at RMA reform there, as well as obviously complying with MDRS and UPSND, Urban Policy Statement, National Housing Development, something like that. Anyway, I talked about it earlier. I got the acronym right earlier. You'll have to bear with me.
All right, 2 to go.
Number 6, please.
We have question X, X for X-ray. I've got a different question. I shall read the one on the screen. In what ways can New Zealand lead the world?
I've talked about the first one already, which is in our COVID response. We had a world-beating COVID response. There is absolutely no reason that if we're talking in the UN about treaties for how we want to respond to pandemics, there is no reason that New Zealand shouldn't be leading the world in how that treaty is formulated and how that treaty is implemented. So I think that's one way in which we can lead the world. The other way in which we can lead the world, there is always going to be a demand for beef and for milk fat, for milk protein. And it's true that cows emit greenhouse gases, right? They fart, they burp, they do all those things. But what we have seen through the data and through the science is that the New Zealand national dairy herd is one of the greenest national dairy herds in the world. We're not going to solve climate change by adding more cows, but we might come a long, long way by helping countries across the world, national dairy herds across the world, have cows that are as efficient and highly productive and healthy and green as ours are.
All right, and now
And we have the last question, which I picked, which is question M. And let's hope we coordinate with the right question. Yes. So what is your party's stance on central bank digital currency? And will your party support removing cash from being used in New Zealand?
So the Opportunities Party fundamentally believes that the central bank digital currency doesn't solve any major problems that we're currently facing. I have views from a tech perspective. I generally believe, my experience in the tech industry has taught me that cryptocurrency is really only good for facilitating computer crime. But in terms of a central bank digital currency, a whole lot of the foundational philosophical reasons why you would do that are because you don't want government control of your currency. So it's kind of a contradiction in terms for the cryptocurrency guys to say, well, RBNZ is going to go away and do a cryptocurrency thing. I think the other big issue about removing cash from usage in New Zealand is around the accessibility of it. Not everybody can afford a fancy cell phone that's got the ability to have the app on it. There are people who aren't very tech savvy, who struggle with vision, who struggle with, with technology. The whole point of cash is that it's universal. Everybody can use it, and it's accepted universally. I wouldn't want us to get into a situation, the Opportunities Party wouldn't want to get us into a situation where we have folks out there who can't use the central bank digital currency, but actually we've removed cash as an option, and they really struggle to live with that. They really struggle to carry out their day-to-day business with that.
Yeah, that's a good answer. I have to say, I have never had a coin run out of battery. You've been doing particularly well. It's working very hard, considering there's only one of you. We're going to go to a quick break, but before we do, I'd like to ask one question. Have you been to many of the other Meet the Candidates things?
So I've been to a couple of public meetings in Hamilton, one at a group called Zeal, which was around community services and getting young people access to community services and government services. Another one around the local women's chapter of the Women's Association of New Zealand. So a couple of public meetings, not too many though.
Yeah. And if you couldn't vote for yourself, who out of the other candidates would you recommend?
It's tough, right? I think if I couldn't vote for myself, I would vote for whoever was representing the Opportunities Party, and I think that you should too. If you ruled out the Opportunities Party, then I'd probably vote for the Green Party and whoever was representing them. Either way, I wouldn't vote for one of the larger mainstream parties because I think, again, like I said before, we've had 20 years of lurching between Team Red and Team Blue. It's got us into this situation. Continuing to lurch between Team Red and Team Blue isn't going to get us out of this situation. We need to do something different. We need a fresh voice.
Yes, I think many people would agree with you. And having met many candidates along the way, I think a lot of them have demonstrated ability to work together in a certain commonality on some ideas. So, I suspect that a coalition is in our future. We'll have a quick break and be back for hard-hitting questions. See you then. Very well done. Good. Yes. Very well done. Good, man. Relentless. Yeah. Would you like to drink anything? Yeah, I'm just going to refill my mother. Cool.
I'll tell you what, let's start with the Prime Minister there, Amy. Let's start with the Prime Minister. Yeah, well, I don't really go.
Now we're back with hard-hitting questions. All right. Now we have hard-hitting questions. Now, all of the candidates, every single one of them, need to answer this question, these questions, and there are no defers, there are no butt-in cards. So here we go. Question 1 to Alex. What is the most pressing issue in the Hamilton East electorate?
Thank you, Alex. I think that there are two key questions here. The first key challenge or pressing issue that the electorate is facing, like I said before, is the cost of living. It's the cost of surviving. And it expresses itself in different ways across the electorate. You've got students who are over at Waikato University. They're flatting. Maybe it's their first time away from home. Food costs are really high. Rent is really high. The cost of accommodation is really high. You've got young families a little bit further over in Chartwell and Claudelands. Maybe they're renting, maybe they've just gotten their first home. Rents are still sky high for them, mortgages are sky high for them. And for young kids, it's not cheap to raise kids in New Zealand. You look a little bit further over in Flagstaff, Rototuna area, perhaps you've got people who are a little bit more established, a little bit more well off, and they're thinking, how are my grandkids going to be able to afford to live in the same place that they grew up? And so the Opportunities Party policy around that is land value tax. It's around increasing supply. It's around hitting the demand side of that. And it's more generally around making it a reasonable proposition to grow up where you live and to set down your community roots and be part of society rather than constantly being sent from place to place.
Well answered. And on to our next question. Central government increasingly communicates with citizens via email and text. Therefore, the non-computer literate visit libraries for assistance. Changes to central government practice and legislation impact on local communities, which councils are expected to deliver without funding. Do you believe that central government should form partnerships with councils to deliver central government services? If so, how should these partnerships be funded? And I'll hand it over this time to Alex.
Thank you once again, Alex. Yes is the short answer. We know that local government are accountable to their constituents who live there. We know that they spend more time in the community, and we know that they know those communities a whole lot better than central government might know them. So the Opportunities Party supports that decentralization. We support making those partnerships and empowering local government to provide local services through things like returning GST on the price of new builds into local government coffers to provision infrastructure. And that's infrastructure above the ground, like libraries, as well as below the ground.
All right. And now we come to probably one of the most interesting times in the evening, which is where we ask the candidate about the first members' bill that they would introduce if they were elected as your MP. Now, the members' bill, it can be anything. Any MP can sort of introduce it, bearing in mind that it needs to go through scrutiny, and without support, it's going to fail. So it needs to be something that's realistic, but also yes, it needs to be something that is realistic to do, and with general support. But yeah, it can be. We can get some good creative answers out of it. So yeah, Alex, what would be your members' bill?
I would introduce a members' bill under the banner of the Opportunities Party that legislates artificial intelligence and the use of artificial intelligence in New Zealand. I think that AI represents a fantastic opportunity to the people of New Zealand, as well as a fantastic threat if we fumble the ball and drop it. We've been told for a long time that AI is going to take away the manual drudgery in our lives. It's going to make our lives less stressful and easier by doing all of those tasks for us, so that we'll have time to do art and to make music and to pursue our hobbies. And what we're finding is that AI is doing all the hobbies and making the art, and doing all of our hobbies, while we're working these jobs for not enough pay, struggling with the cost of living. So I think any legislation that I would introduce around AI would focus on two things. It would focus on creating institutions, creating places where we can study the use of AI in terms of policy, where we can create new artificial intelligence models that can do new things, and be a world leader in the creation of, as well as the legislation of AI, so that workers are protected. And at the same time, making it really clear for businesses in New Zealand and government departments and other groups in New Zealand who want to use AI as part of their products, give them a standard, give them a framework that they can use to report to their customers how they're using AI, how our data is being used to train AI and to provide that functionality, so that everybody in New Zealand understands what the impact of AI on their life is. There's a quote from IBM, which I really believe. The quote goes something like this: "A computer can never make a decision. A computer can never make a management decision. A computer can never be accountable for a decision. We as humans are accountable for the decisions or for the things that computers do and the things that they say. So we must never look to have computers make decisions and offload the accountability from the people who are creating and maintaining those computers."
Certainly a fast-moving field, and yeah, definitely. If we can get a handle on the situation, then yeah, absolutely. I'd like to introduce our candidate to offer their closing statement.
Firstly, thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun blitzing through all of these questions. I think the thing that I would finish off with saying is that politics, as I talked about earlier, needs innovation, and the Opportunities Party is ideally placed to provide a fresh voice into Parliament, to give you an alternative to Winston Peters, to give you a party who's focused not on whether your idea is red-coloured or blue-coloured, but actually on whether or not your idea is going to work. Is it going to make the lives of New Zealanders better? And is it going to do that in a provable and demonstrable way? We cannot keep lurching between left and right, between red and blue, and expect our situations to change. I would strongly ask for you to consider party voting for the Opportunities Party to introduce a fresh voice into Parliament that will represent your needs and focus on solving the root problems that affect you every single day, rather than applying more and more band-aids on top.
Well, I have to say thank you, Alex, for coming here and supporting this new orange innovative idea of this Meet the Candidates format. It really does mean a lot. And yeah, fortunately, across the river in Hamilton West, looks like we're going to have a fantastic turnout at 7 p.m. Of many candidates. And I'm not exactly sure why it is that we only have one person brave enough in Hamilton East to show. I'm going to leave that to you, the voters, to decide. But no, thank you for watching, both our live, genuine audience and the people tuning in, and also the people tuning in afterwards who are looking to make their mind up before the vote on October the 14th. Well, I think that's all from me, and that's all from you. And see you 7 p.m. for Hamilton West. Ta-ta!